So I'm going to introduce our next speaker. And this gentleman has actually explored the wild, wild web. Our next speaker is the one who took down the Genesis market. And y'all are not going to want to miss this, because John Fokker, he is previously from the Dutch National High-Tech Crime Unit, or as they say it in Dutch, Team High-Tech Crime. Team High-Tech Crime. That sounds like an amazing television show I'd like to watch. And in fact, the Dutch police produce documentaries all about how they take down criminals. So John is a principal engineer at Trellix. He leads the threat intelligence group, and he's the one who worked with the Dutch National High-Tech Crime Unit, and he's the one who helped take down the criminals and the Genesis market. So John is going to take us through how to take cookies from the Cookie Monster. Take it away, John. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much and welcome. I guess everybody leaving the room were actually customers of Genesis Market, and they already know the story, so they can leave. I'm fortunate enough that, I heard it, that's the timer, sorry. I'm fortunate enough that I work with Trellix, and I work within Trellix Advanced Research Center, and I run a threat intelligence team, or the threat intelligence group. And that team covers cybercrime and nation-state actors across the globe, 24/7. And that research helps us improve our products, but also our own products, and do research and publish about it. And once in a while, it allows us to do some really, really cool things. And that is, for instance, for the greater good, helping law enforcement. So, hands up. Who knows who the Cookie Monster is? I'll be disappointed if somebody has not raised their hands. So who knows who the Cookie Monster is? Okay, everybody knows it. Who knows what Genesis Market is? Good. Well, I'll promise you after this talk, you will know what Genesis Market is and why it's important. How we got approached in this whole story is a bit different. This is literally me on the day that the police called. It was a couple of months ago. I was skiing. I had a well-deserved holiday, and I was on top of the slope. I was like, click, click, ready to go, and then my phone rang. And I was like, shall I take it or not? And it was unknown number. Normally I never pick up an unknown number. For this reason, I picked up. And it was, hey John, this is what you call it from the police. We have something interesting. I was like, oh, do tell. We need your help. It's almost like they call the A-team. But anyways, they said, we need your help with something. We cannot tell you what it is. It is secret. And we're like, okay, is it that secret? But anyways, let's call and meet up physically when you're back from your holiday, and let's have a talk. So funny enough, a week later, I went to the police station. We had to sign an NDA, and then they told us, we are going to take down Genesis Market, but we need your help. And we weren't the only private sector entity. There was another company as well, and they asked us for some specific things. And I was like, great, this is awesome, because Genesis Market has been around for quite a while, and it's finally time that somebody's taking it down. So this is how we got involved, and this was the outcome. So if you are familiar with Genesis Market or you read the news, this is what it looked like when they took it down. The familiar splash screen and everything else, all those banners. What is interesting is that they did more than 200 arrests during that day. So it was a multi-operation. It was not only about taking down the site, finding out who the victims are, remediation, all these things. No, it was about attribution and apprehending their customers. So think of it, a global operation that started in Australia all the way to the US of more than 200 arrests. But when did it start? Just like a fairy tale or once upon a time in the West, it started in 2018 already. This is the original advertisement that Genesis Market made on Exploit, a cybercriminal forum, where they introduced themselves. Up till that time, you had other markets, BlackPass and other things, that were selling credentials that were stolen. But this was a little different. And at the time, I was like, oh, is this really relevant or whatever? But what they were offering was browser fingerprints or browser cookies. So basically, anything that identifies you as you on your browser, they were stealing, and they were selling complete profiles. Up until that time, there were mostly shops selling credentials, username, passwords, and that was enough. But with the rise of multi-factor authentication, they actually provided something to circumvent this. And they were around. Our team has been around this forum quite a bit. We stayed there. We didn't really interact. We didn't buy anything. We acted like a fly on the wall. That's obviously very often a really good tactic, to be the fly on the wall, not to look, just to look and see what happens. And when we zoom in, if you're not familiar, what are the dangers of Genesis? So like I said, it has everything you need to take over an account. Who in this room goes online shopping? Hands, everyone. That's easy. I always ask easy questions that everybody can raise their hand. So I can imagine that if you go online shopping, you might have seen either from your browser that says, "Do you trust this site?" Who clicks yes? And now nobody raises their hands. I knew it. We're all security professionals, maybe one or two. So when that happens, or when you have to do an authentication to the website, and you log in, and then you do something else, you grab a coffee, you open up a different screen, you come back, and then you come back to the website and you don't have to authenticate. It already knows, like, "Hey, John, you're back." I think we all have experienced that. The mechanism that makes sure that you don't have to log in, so that convenience, the usability, that's the Achilles heel that Genesis Market is targeting. Because the online services do this by planting cookies, taking elements from your browser, taking elements of your computer, your language settings, and all these things, and storing them, and then storing them locally and comparing it to what they have, and they say, "Yes, this is still John. He authenticated prior. We still trust him because all these parameters are in place." These parameters are stored locally. So what Genesis Market does, the malware that they have, they steal these parameters. They bundle it up in a package, and they sell it. So if you have all those parameters, and there's even a proxy, you can successfully take over this account. They have malware. We're going to look at that a little bit. Funny enough, I was sending in my slides, and Microsoft Defender went haywire because of the malware detection names. Yeah, it's funny. Talk about being sensitive. But anyways, the malware that they use is very interesting because it's not even that obfuscated. It's not even super sophisticated. It is literally just right there. But nobody sees it because there's no mechanisms that really checks it. And removing the malware doesn't alleviate the problem because your credentials and everything is already gone. So if you just remove the malware, the criminals can still have your credentials. And by using this website, it is an effective way to bypass multi-factor authentication. So if a service uses a pre-authentication, or they have elements that they use to check if you're pre-authenticated, if you can log in so that they already know you, that's the Achilles heel that this website is targeting. And we're talking not only about your Amazon or your Facebook or whatever. No, this is banks, corporate logins, and all these things. We were able to trace users of Genesis Market to ransomware attacks. So this is something that a lot of initial access brokers are using to gain that initial foothold, to build up their reputation on the network, get more credentials and all these things, and sell it off. So the corporate credentials, that's the worrying thing. Trellix is a company that targets this. Our appliances are mostly, again, for enterprises. So we look at the major threats. And this is also, a lot of consumers are being targeted through this. But during COVID, and mind you, this website was up in 2018, and during the COVID pandemic, everybody had to work from home. Not all companies had adequate security measures on people's own laptops. So if that laptop was actually infected with the malware here, those corporate credentials from your Office 365 or whatever it is that you log into your corporate environment got stolen as well. So you can see that it could have a really big impact. So all good, John, but what are we talking about? What's the size? What's the scale? So on the screen, on the side, you see a screenshot of the Genesis Market. It looks very plain, very simple, but this, we call it almost the Amazon of stolen credentials and online profiles. In their showroom, they have more than 450,000 very neatly organized online profiles. You can click on them, get everything, and everything was structured perfectly. Working with the police, we actually learned that was only the showroom. In the back, they had even more, about 1.5 million credentials. So if there's one takeaway here from the story here and you go home and you haven't done it already, check either Have I Been Pwned or check through the Dutch police website if you are in this dump, because it could save you a lot of headaches. There were more than 225 countries listed. So it's not only on the US, it's almost every country in the world they had credentials. And it's interesting, because the price ranged for the amount of logins or the amount of online services that you had in your profile. So if you had, for instance, a US profile, you had several banks, you had several online shops, maybe social media profiles and all that stuff, that would raise the price. Whereas, yeah, if you're in, let's say, Timbuktu and you have only one login for one thing when you got infected, very unlucky, you'll probably be on the cheaper end. And what was interesting, they did real-time updates. So the victims weren't aware. Every time they updated their password or changed anything and the malware was still there, got siphoned off, instantly updated. And this website made it very clear. It's like, hey, there's new fresh logins, all these things. So you can see in the bottom, Google, Amazon, PayPal, Netflix, you name it. So if somebody's using your Spotify or your Netflix, it might be this. When we zoom in on one of those accounts, if we want to purchase them, and this is the website, you can see that there's, for instance, this is a Dutch account, what you see here. And if you have really good eyes and you can zoom in, there's a couple of things. If you're Dutch, might get triggered. Let's see if the laser works. This one here, obviously it's very highly secured, but that's our government login for your Social Security. So any governmental service, if you have to do your taxes or anything else, is linked through that website. Very lucky for that website that it has a different authentication method, so it's not susceptible to this attack. But you can imagine if you just had a government website with basic MFA, it's in this data set. And as a user of Genesis Market, let's say we're buyers, you can just log in, click on this profile, you deposit some money, and you can grab these credentials, all these elements. So how do you commit the fraud, or how do you take over that account? Well, Genesis was like the Amazon and made it easy. They had the proprietary browser. So they had a browser based on Chrome that they've modified, and you could actually purchase or download that browser if you were a member and you've already downloaded credentials, and you can use this browser to load your stolen credentials in, even activate a proxy through the victim's machine, and then assume the identity of the victim. What is interesting is that you cannot download the browser, you needed to purchase credentials. That's a mechanism that this store does to raise the bar. Because by doing so, you actually commit a crime. You purchase stolen credentials from somebody else. You commit a crime in order to get the browser. Well, an older version of the browser was on VT, and we got a copy of the browser through the police, luckily, so we were able to do some research. So that leaves us with a question for myself, because when I looked at 2018 at the Genesis Market, when we were on the forums, we saw that they were also advertising and asking for other commodity malware families to say, well, we'll buy your logs, we'll buy your access. We want to partner with you, contact us in a DM. So that means like Danabot, FIDAR Stealer, maybe Redline, all these info stealers were doing business with Genesis Market. But the site, as you just see or saw, is very neatly organized. So how did it go from having these partnerships with other malware families to having that neatly organized store? I was like, are they doing this all by hand, organizing this? Because every piece of commodity malware has different functionalities, different ways of storing data, different data structures, different taxonomies. That must be a headache. Well, actually, they had their own malware. So when we look at the infection chain, how they did it, and this was the example, we were lucky enough that, in this case, the Dutch police has done several online purchases of the credentials. They were able to locate the victim. They were able to go to that specific victim and grab the information from the victim's machine. They were sharing this information with us, so only the malware, only the malicious code, and they asked us, Trellix, okay, but how does this work? How did the victim become infected? In this case, the victim actually was very interesting. They were security aware. They used torrent sites to download a competitor AV of us, which was obviously infected with malware. So that's like a catch-22, or how you would call it. It's a bit unlucky. You go and download something to get yourself protected and actually open up a backdoor. But anyways, the binary that they downloaded contained Danabot. And Danabot injected themselves. They created a foothold on the system. And in this case, we believe that the Danabot access was sold to Genesis Market. And what Genesis Market did was use that access to launch their own, we call it malware. It's a JavaScript-based, it's actually a browser extension. So what they did was the Chrome browser is really good at detecting attacks coming through the web. So they're really good at that, because you had the iframe attacks and all that stuff for credential theft and banking fraud. They made a really good, solid structure. However, the backdoor on the system itself, as the system itself is infiltrated, it was child's play to inject a malicious extension into the Chrome browser and have it just sit there in plain sight. These criminals didn't even take a lot of methods or measures to obfuscate their code. It was pure JavaScript. It was all there. So they used that browser extension, which hides amongst many other browser extensions, to grab data from the machine. What's interesting is that we can go into the whole code. A browser extension that has C2 communication. I can understand that some browser extensions want to have some statistics that they would send over, but examining the code, we can see something interesting, especially up there. Because if you know what it is, they're actually beacon out to a Bitcoin address. They request information through a Bitcoin address. Well, I have never seen a browser extension in my life do this. And what was interesting is that they just checked it on the blockchain and they got a response. And the response was in base 58. And the response code was actually encoded base 58, and that translated to a C2 domain, uRabbit. This is very interesting. I think a month ago, Kaspersky published a piece of research on something similar. They named it differently. It had the exact same C2 server, so we kind of called them and said, like, hey guys, maybe you should read Genesis Market and our blog, because I'm pretty sure you're looking at Genesis Market. So it's interesting to see that even though our efforts are there to distribute the malware code and signatures and everything to our industry peers, there are still infected machines out there. So what did it steal? I named a couple of things, but if we look at all the features, it goes anywhere from your screen grab, your monitor, memory, CPU stage, all kinds of things. There's a whole list. You can read it all in our paper. And then right at the bottom, it also says the proxy. That is what makes it interesting, because a lot of these safeguards in online services, they check your IP address. They check if you are you based on your IP. Well, this malware just uses your machine as a proxy, and you route the traffic through it, and you can take it over. When we look at the MITRE techniques, we just have it as a repository. For us, it's very helpful because we communicate to our customers and base our remediation on it. So you see all the familiar stuff: credential access, stealing web session cookies, all these things, proxies. So it's very familiar stuff if you're familiar with MITRE techniques. So we have over 600 million sensors in the world with our company. We have 41,000 customers globally, and what is interesting is that based on the malware that we got, we were building remediation. We were sharing this at the appropriate time, because obviously you can imagine this is an operation. When it started, it took several days, and there was a timeline, so we could not share the malware early because we might tip off the criminals. So we had to do some other work. But we also ran the telemetry on the malicious files across the globe. And what you see here in the screenshot of the world is what we saw in this region. So yes, Israel is also impacted, and other countries like Turkey as well. So this is from April 5th this year, the telemetry that we saw. And it's not millions, it's not thousands, we're talking about hundreds of machines. But still, these are Trellix customers impacted by Genesis Market. The contributions that we did for Genesis were, as you can see, the malware analysis. But we also wrote remediation advice, because the police is great at catching criminals, but they're not the best at writing remediation advice. So they need some help. So we helped out to write a remediation advice directed at consumers, but also at corporate entities. I can assume that most of the people here work for a company. So what do you do if your company is being targeted by a criminal that's using these type of credentials? How do you detect that stuff? How do you detect stolen credential usage in this way? Because they do a lot of efforts to fly under the radar. So internally, we have a nice portfolio that we use to align this. And lastly, sample sharing. Because these are one of these unique moments in time where you're allowed to help out. And it's not about keeping the cards close to your chest, but when the time comes to share, you need to share this with the community. You need to make people aware that this threat is out here. So we did that. As soon as the takedown notice was there, the big screen, we could share it on VT. We shared it through our internal channels with Symantec, Microsoft, and everybody else, so everybody is aware. And judging by the difficulties we had with my presentation, I think Microsoft went very thoroughly, so they blocked it quite well. And all this with the arrest led to, we can say we took the cookies from the cookie monster. Does this end the story? The people that were arrested were the buyers, were the users globally. The admins of the store were based in a different country. There's no extradition treaty with them. They're based in the Russian Federation. The clear websites of the store were taken down, but the Tor website was still live. So, John, all great. Hosanna, that's a great story. Oh, wow. But the website is still live. Yeah. Over 200 arrests, clear web infrastructure taken down, but it's still live. You can question if this was a success. And we got pushback, even from reporters from the BBC. They came and it's like, oh, but they're still there, or whatever. And I said, like, wait. There's a couple of things you need to understand with these kind of operations. Sometimes, and that's just coming from my background as law enforcement, sometimes you do not have the means or the legal framework in place that you can go out and arrest these people. They're in a country that they're in a safe haven. So what's the next best thing? That's disruption. That is breaking that criminal chain, breaking that trust that they can't operate anymore. And what was funny is that these operators, operating the Amazon of stolen credentials and all that stuff, stored all their user accounts, so all the criminals that were buying stuff in clear text. Well, that's great, isn't it? Talk about OPSEC. You want to be a criminal, you want to be a big shot, you buy your credentials to do ransomware, and everything's stored in clear text. Very quickly, the admin account got banned from exploit. They said, like, we can't trust you right now. We don't know what the deal is. Because he said very quickly, oh, we'll be up in 48 hours, and we're back in business. Because he wants to be back in business. And as a criminal, if your store got burned once, why would you do business with somebody like that? Right? If he already has proven himself that the store is invalid, bad OPSEC, and all his customers, or a large portion of the customers, because they had thousands of customers, are arrested, why would you take that risk as a criminal? You would look elsewhere. And it is a nice mystery that the current level of access that law enforcement has is still a mystery. We don't know how far or how deep they are, and they try to keep that close to their chest, because that creates uncertainty. Criminals don't know who to trust, and that's a perfect thing. If we're trying to target cyber criminals, the best thing you can do is break that trust. If you don't trust anyone, it's bad for business. And cyber criminals need each other to commit business. It's similar to the real world. I don't do business with somebody I don't trust. I feel like they're making a scam out of me, or I can run the risk that something happens. And in the real world, you lose money. But in the criminal world, you can go behind bars, just like the Cookie Monster. So yeah, what's good is a shop without its customers. And actually, last night, I was having drinks with a good friend of mine, Kobe Schwartz. He lives here as well. He's a good researcher. And he showed me this screenshot. I didn't have my research laptop, so I couldn't jump on it at that time, but I checked it this morning. This is an advertisement of the same forum that banned the moniker, banned the individual. They unbanned him, and he posted this message. So yes, you can argue that the shop was still alive, but what he's essentially doing here is selling his shop. He doesn't want to do anything anymore. He doesn't want to be involved with this thing. So that shows us that this methodology works. There is a way of disruption. So this is very, very interesting for me. So there's always two sides of the story. Everybody debates. But when I saw this last night, it put a big smile on my face, and I was like, see, I don't think the BBC was right. But yeah, the house is for sale. And I got 33 seconds left. And with this, I hope you were informed about everything about Genesis Market, and you know what it takes to take cookies from the Cookie Monster. Thank you.